2018 was a huge year for Gibson. From having to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy to the release of many limited edition models, the most memorable event has to be the replacing of their CEO, Henry Juszkiewicz, thus birthing a brand new Gibson era. We've had the golden McCarty era, the dark Norland ages, the fine Juszkiewicz era, and now the Curleigh era? Former Levi Strauss's CEO, James Curleigh, has now assumed the title of CEO at Gibson starting November 1st, 2018. Due to this momentous occasion in Gibson history, I thought it would be appropriate to take a trip down memory lane and pick out the top 5 most influential Juszkiewicz era guitars. These aren't just models that I like, but these are ones that I feel impacted Gibson history in a major way. Number 5. Gibson Les Paul Florentine. Starting off this list is the little-known Les Paul Florentine model. Besides the Les Paul signature from the mid-70s, this was the first Les Paul to sport a semi-hollow body construction. That helped bridge the gap between a Les Paul and a 335. This instrument was essentially a Les Paul custom by all other attributes, and it came in a plain and flamed maple top. These are important because they showed that you could blend two models to create something beautiful, and it inspired a very successful run in 2014 called the ESLP. The ESLPs became a booming market for Gibson Memphis. Even though that model is significantly different in construction and feel compared to the original run of the Florentines, they still provided many people with that great Les Paul sound for a much cheaper price. The Florentine I had played and felt just like a Les Paul custom, but it had a little bit of extra warmth to its tone. Whereas the ESLPs I've had experience with, they're a little bit brighter in comparison, and they're so lightweight they kind of feel like toys. However, when I compared one to a historic reissue, the sound comparisons were very favorable. So for that, I tip my hat to Juszkiewicz. Number 4. Les Paul Smartwood series. The Smartwood series was an important stepping stone for Gibson. It illustrates Henry's future game planning towards creating good relationships with environmentally friendly, responsibly sourced wood and its suppliers. In this case, it was the Rainforest Alliance. This was also a great way to slowly introduce the public to alternative woods being used on their guitars. This series of guitars had 3 lineups that ran from 1996 all the way until 2006. Those models were the Exotic, Studio, and Standard. Now you might ask, why do we need alternatives? I'll only accept rosewood and ebony on my Gibson fretboards. Okay, it's fine to think traditionally, but it's not always possible for a company to operate like that. Over-harvesting and depleting the natural resources of these golden era woods has led to increased pricing and sourcing issues. New CITES laws that were put in place during 2017 also made it harder for the import and export of rosewood and many other wooden species. Government regulations, cue the government series guitars, are also something for the company to fear. The first one of these models was the Smartwood Standard. These experimented with fretboard alternatives. Chechen was used instead of rosewood. Everything else about this one was about the same as a regular Standard except for the Smartwood truss rod cover and the gold hardware. This means a cream-bound maple top with a mahogany back and neck with cream plastics. These also sported natural finishes to show off the wood grain. The next series, starting in 1998 through 2001, was the Smartwood Exotic. This second iteration took things a whole lot further. These were more akin to a Les Paul Special with a thinner body than a standard Les Paul. They still retained the mahogany body and neck, but Gibson introduced 6 different options for the top and a Kurupe fingerboard. The wooden options for the top were Kurupe, Hiroba, Banara, Ambe Guasu, Tapariva Guasu, and Chancharana. These exotic woods really cater towards people that love natural wood grain. The final series to wrap this up was the Smartwood Studio from 2002 to 2006. These were offered in a few different wood options, but resembled a Les Paul Studio in its thickness. However, they also had a mother-of-pearl Gibson logo, which made them more special than a regular Studio. Most of these were Miracardiara tops, with mahogany backs paired with a Preciosa fretboard. There is also a swamp ash body mahogany neck version in this lineup. In the end, outside the Smartwood series, you never really saw these woods get used again. However, the Smartwood lineup helped clear the way for things such as baked maple, granadillo, and richlight to be introduced, which definitely impacted Gibson's history. Number 3. The Les Paul Catalina Elegant. The Les Paul Catalina was the first model to sport a form of chambering weight relief in a Les Paul. This is a huge changing point in Gibson history. The Catalina was offered in Riverside Red, Canary Yellow, and Cascade Green with a later finish option of Black Pearl. It featured an ebony fingerboard with a maple top and a mahogany back. And besides the exotic solid color finishes, they sported pearloid pickguards and truss rod covers with a large custom shop inlay bared on their headstock. Similarly, the Les Paul Elegants, they were built the same way as the Catalina, but featured unbelievably nice figured maple tops, abalone fretboard markers, and transparent finishes. To name a few of them, there's Natural, Peacock, Purple, Crimson, and Honeyburst, with limited edition models in the Alloy and Silver Flow series. After 1998 though, the chambering was changed and the custom shop edition inlay was dropped for a more traditional Les Paul look. These were important because in late 2006, Gibson switched all of their Les Paul standards from a 9-hole weight relief to a similar chambering that started the evolution of weight relief throughout all the Les Paul models, and that helped make Les Pauls more comfortable for many people to play because they were easier on their aging backs. Regardless of your opinion on its effective tone, it certainly changed the way we view Les Paul history. Number 2. The Les Paul Snake Pit. The Gibson Les Paul Snake Pit might just seem like a fancy looking Les Paul with a cobra inlay on the fretboard and a snake relief carving on the stunningly flamed maple top. But this just isn't any fancy over-the-top Les Paul. This was Slash's first production run signature guitar. Now don't confuse this with the 4 that he custom ordered for himself in 1990. Those aren't included. Around 100 of these snake pits were made in 2 separate runs, and since then, many fakes have been made thanks to their $20,000 plus price tag. Slash is often stated as to be why someone decided to pick up a Les Paul in the first place. He is such an iconic Paul player that Gibson named him the Global Brand Ambassador in 2017. To get a title like that, you know Gibson makes a lot of money off of his signature guitars. Due to the awesome sales of his Snake Pit model, this broadened Gibson's scope in trying out other signature guitars for famous users such as Joe Perry, Ace Frehley, and Jimmy Page. Now you're probably saying, hey, wait a second. Signature guitars were commonplace before this because, hey, the Les Paul itself is a signature model for Les Paul. Yes, that is true, but this is the first time someone else's name was also associated alongside the Les Paul branding. This was the Slash Les Paul to own, and then it birthed more than 10 Slash signature Les Pauls, as well as a few other models. And without his first signature guitar, there might be less Les Paul players out there today. Now, before we get to number 1 here, I do want to briefly mention 2 runners-up that I felt were very close to this list and maybe should have replaced number 5, but runner-up number 1 are the Robot and Super Robot guitars. I initially made the decision to stick with generally positive, forward-thinking models, but I didn't feel this list would be complete without mentioning Henry's fascination with robot technology. This includes models such as the Firebird X and Darkfire that offered self-tuning capabilities as well as built-in effects. These instruments proved to be too technical and perhaps too expensive for most guitarists, so they did not sell well and left Gibson in quite a bit of trouble financially. However, if you actually take the time to sit down with one of these instruments, tackle the brief learning curve, they are amazing for recording purposes as well as inspiring you to play. And if nothing else, it helps illustrate what not to do with the Gibson brand. Perhaps there is a small market for robot guitars, but if you're going to make them, make sure they're not overly expensive or find a way to simplify them. Runner-up number 2 is the 2015 lineup. Oh boy, if you were active in the guitar community during 2015, it was a time of mass confusion. The 2015s were a complete abomination. The general public disliked them heavily because they had a wider classical guitar-like neck and a 0-fret nut. They also complained about the death scrawl on the headstock, which was Les Paul's signature, as well as the hologram of Les on the back of the headstock. But while so many people are quick to jump on board and say that they hate these models, they did birth the High Performance series, which many people enjoy today. These instruments aren't for everyone, but it is something new that definitely impacted Gibson. So now, without any further ado, let's see what number 1 is. Number 1, the Les Paul Classic. This was such an easy choice for me. The Les Paul Classic would rank in the top 5 of the most influential Gibson guitars of all time because it is so historically important, and here's why. The Les Paul Burst is inarguably the most collectible Les Paul ever made. They were originally produced from 1958 through 1960 and then discontinued in favor of the SG body shape. These will cost you the price of a good house. I mean, we're talking anywhere between $100,000 to about $400,000, or even more if it was celebrity owned. And since most musicians cannot afford that, people were looking for the next best thing. That's not to say the Les Paul Classic was the first reissue. The earliest ones are the Strings and Things Les Pauls from the late 70s. There were also other Gibson attempts like the KM, Heritage 80, Leo's Les Paul, and other prehistoric reissues. However, when Gibson changed hands in 1986, there were many attempts at getting a successful model out to turn their hardships around. Most of these attempts were crazy super strats that just failed terribly because they were way too far behind. These were models such as the Q series, the US-1, and WRC models. Now, standard prehistoric reissues were still being made at this time, but the Classic was the first take at revamping them and became that first home run hit under Gibson's new ownership. They struck gold with the Les Paul Classic series. They were introduced in late 1989, and the Les Paul Classic at that point in time was the highest end Les Paul you could buy, and they sold very well. When the custom shop opened in late 1993, they were then downgraded in status and changed to make way for the new historic R8s and R9s that were being introduced. Since then, the Classic has now become an affordable model that has undergone many changes in its history, but that doesn't change the huge impact it had on Gibson. Reissues are the bread and butter, the money winners for Gibson, and I give most of that credit to the Les Paul Classic lineup. In conclusion, whether you like Henry or not, as the head of the company, what he did with it, or how he treated people while he was the CEO, there is no arguing that his team's leadership did not save Gibson from financial ruin in the late 80s and the early 90s to make it what it is today. Many interesting and sometimes scary models came out under Henry's ownership, but these were the top 5 that I felt were the most influential. Do you agree with my list? Let me know in the comments section what your top 5 influential models would be from the Henry J era. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.